You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Ross Kay from Ross Kay Realty Consultants. Welcome to the show, Ross.
Thanks for having me back, Jim. I hope things are going well with you.
Right at the top of your webpage, it says Canada's housing bubble is at 38.9%. What does that mean to us?
Housing bubbles. Okay, so interesting idea that you brought that up. Housing bubbles are a naturally occurring event in any real estate market where you get mortgage lending based on the sale price of a home. So what that means is that the only way that a real estate market can keep going forward is if the selling prices continue to increase. What does that mean? What that means is who moves every single year? People are confused. They think that it's a cross-section of everybody in your community is going to move. That's not necessarily true. Yes, it may be a cross-section, but it will be a cross-section of the people who can afford to move. It is impossible in Canada today to move unless you can afford to move. Now, of course, there will be people that are forced to move, i.e., they have to sell their house and rent. They're not going to buy another house. But over 95% of all sales that take place are always for people who can afford to move. How can you afford to move? Well, the only way you can afford to move from your existing home to your next home is that if you've built enough equity in your existing home that you can purchase your next home without entailing CMHC fees. So in Canada, realistically, what we say, what we have always said for now 30 years, people don't move in Canada unless they have 25% equity built up in their house, and that 25% has to be a large enough number that it allows them to go out and trade up to a more expensive home. If they don't have that equity built up in their home, they simply don't move. That's just a simple fact of real estate. With real estate, if there are 10 houses for sale, all priced at $100,000, and there's a buyer who comes out to purchase a house and they can afford $100,000, they are going to select the very best of those 10 homes to purchase. They're not going to select the fifth best, the sixth best, the fourth best. They're not even going to choose the second best home. They're going to choose the best home that's on the market. Their real estate sales agent is going to encourage them to buy the best home that's on the market because it's the most home that they get for their money. So of those 10 homes, they go to purchase a home. Those homes are all priced at $100,000. They picked the best one. It's no longer there. So even though those other 9 houses were not worth $100,000, only the first one was worth $100,000, and that's why it sold. It's gone. 2 days later, there's only 9 houses left for sale. There's another buyer who comes along. They'll spend $100,000. They look and they see, ooh, there's 9 houses for sale. We want to buy one. Which one do they buy? They buy the best of the 9 remaining. It's gone. So now, the next buyer that comes out, he's looking at the third best home that was for sale in the last 30 days because the first 2 are no longer for sale. But if he wants to buy a home, he has to purchase the third best home at the same price, $100,000, as the 2 better homes that have already sold. And this is the premise on what all of organized real estate is built on. This is the premise on which CMHC will lend money on mortgages. It's the premises on how banks allow you to borrow more and more money from them. It's the premise that the entire real estate infrastructure is built upon. There was one thing that through the thousands of sales my family participated in, that every single seller of real estate ever told us. And they told us the same thing, whether it was in the 1990s during the last correction or in 2007 at the last price crazy. That item was, look, Ross, we want to move, but we're not going to sell if we lose any money. So if that's the general consensus of the entire public, the only people who ever do move are the ones who can afford to move. That's the reason why it's usually the person who owns the best 4 houses out of 10 are the people who are able to move, which is why in Canada last year, for every 100 houses that were listed for sale, only 38 sold. The other 62 were taken off the market without selling. But if those other 62 went in to get their mortgage refinance because the banks and CMHC are using market value appraisals, or more commonly called the Canadian Real Estate Association's average selling price, those people can go out and can get a big loan, even though their home was not as good as the 4 homes that sold. So this is how a housing bubble naturally forms in a country like Canada. Now, anybody who questions my comment that CMHC values houses based on the Canadian Real Estate Association's average selling price, even though it may sound foolish to the listeners who've listened to you and I speak over the years, they can pull up from CMHC's own website the 2014 annual report. They can scroll down to page 30, and they can see where CMHC uses the Canadian Real Estate Association's average sale price to calculate the inflation in house prices that CMHC used. So anybody who questions what I'm saying, all they need to do is to go to the CMHC's own website, pull the report, look at page 30, and there it is sitting right before your eyes. What this revelation did for us, though, Jim, was it made us think, if CMHC is measuring their risk based on the Canadian Real Estate Association's average selling price, what kind of problems is that creating for people who are getting CMHC insurance? So we used a little calculation that our families always used, and it's called the free house. And the free house principle is this: if you purchase your house today, how many years are you going to have to own it before your mortgage payments, all of the interest that you paid to get that home paid off, plus the original purchase price that you paid for the house has been surpassed by the current value of the property. So that's what we call the free house. In other words, you would live in a house 25 years. By the end of the 25 years, the house would have increased in value enough that the amount you originally paid for the house, all the mortgage payments you made on the house, all the interest you paid to carry that mortgage for those 25 years is refunded to you. So on that day, you technically own the house for free. You didn't pay a single penny for it. Now, if you go back to January 1st of 1990 and you use this calculation, you would have found out that it took you until the year 2010 to get your free house. So you would have owned your house for 20 years before property values had increased enough, interest rate had dropped enough where you got a free house. Now, what about your friend? The friend who said you were crazy to buy in 1990. The friend who went out and bought their house, the exact same house you bought, in 2002. Well, your friend, he got his free house in 2007. So he got even though he's bought his house 12 years after you did, his house was free 3 years before yours was. And this is what happens when interest rates are declining and then average selling prices begin to increase, which is when the housing bubble forms. So what we have in Canada, I don't know how long it goes back, Jim, but prior to 1981, we didn't track the markets prior to 81. I think anybody trying to track before that, they're not going to be able to come up with legitimate numbers anyway. But since 1981, we have never been in a period where interest rates have dropped like they have since the mid-90s, and then selling prices have increased as they have since about 2003. So this is why the housing bubble has become as large as it is. It's why the housing bubble is able to inflate, and it's why it's currently it's actually a little bit higher than 38.9 because that was last month's measure that we had on there. We just finished doing our home value index update. We haven't updated the housing bubble calculation yet. That's on the list for this week. But it's certainly over 39%, and that housing bubble calculation, Jim, is 100% accurate. People say to us, well, how do you calculate a housing bubble? This is what I know. This is what every economist in the world has suggested. It's what Nobel laureate winners, Robert Shiller down in the state, theorized. House prices always increase with inflation. That's all they increase. Mr. Shiller is 100% correct. What Mr. Shiller didn't know, and what economists don't know, is why do the prices increase over inflation then until a point that they have to correct? Well, the reason they increase over inflation is the best houses sell, and only those who can afford to move. So the average selling price in Canada only has to increase with inflation and the costs that are imbued upon it by the home selling infrastructure. So in other words, what it costs you really to move. You can go to any place in Canada where there are over 100,000 sales have taken place in a year. You can probably do it even with about 70,000. This calculation is 100% accurate. So we're going to be releasing this week our calculations for Canada, Ontario, or British Columbia, Ontario, and the Toronto's GTA, because the GTA is a large enough single area. You're looking at over 90,000 sales a year, where the calculation is really, really, really accurate, almost as accurate. Well, it's more accurate as for some provinces. But in those 4 different areas, where those 4 different areas have all unique home selling infrastructure costs, the correlation is 100%. You remove the home selling infrastructure costs and you leave inflation, and that's what you have for what the real value of your real estate is today. Basically what we've done is we've just proven what Robert Shiller, the Nobel laureate, the Nobel Prize winner, theorized. We have just proven what he couldn't, because we know how the real estate market operates.
We'll have more with Ross Kay right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Ross Kay. Australia put in a law that penalizes people who buy residential real estate but don't live in it. Has it made any difference in sales or prices there?
No, because Australia is it most resembles Canada from a real estate data standpoint. So in other words, the United States, there is about 60% of all the real estate data that's in the United States you can get access to. In Australia, you can get access to about 80% of it, and in Canada, you can get access to 99% of it. So when we say Australia is the closest country to Canada in terms of real estate data, what we mean is that even though they're only at 80% and we're at 99%, 80% will still give you a close enough reading that you know what's going on. So Australia talks about the foreign buyers the same way that the British Columbia government has been under pressure to deal with, and the city of Vancouver. And when you look at their real estate data, you'll find that foreign buyers simply do not have any impact at all, or such a minor impact that it doesn't matter. Now, your question, Jim, actually is an interesting one, because it goes back to what I talked about with housing bubbles. If our calculations were not 100% on. Now, what I mean by 100% is we take the average selling price commencing in 1999. We apply inflation, and we apply the home selling infrastructure cost to that average selling price. Year-end 2014, it is a 100% correlation to what the average selling price was at the end of 2014 in British Columbia. So seeing that there is a 100% correlation, we know that that is a result of the infrastructure, it has nothing to do with foreign buyers. Now, that being said, when a housing bubble pops, where the risk for any society or any community is that how many investors own property in your area. So let's say that foreign buyers are, under 2%. Let's say that they're 3% for the sake of the argument. Okay, that 3% of the market has gone on for a couple of years. It didn't just happen overnight. It's been going up ongoing, and it's been building over time. So if you take 3% per year of the total sales, and you do that over a period of time while house prices were increasing, so let's say 10 years, all of a sudden there's a substantial number of owners of real estate in your community who are investors. They are not homeowners like the regular British Columbian is. They are simply investors. Investors also are people who buy single detached homes or single unit residential homes, and they rent them out to somebody else. These are small-time investors. The average small-time investor in Canada owns fewer than 2 homes. But they have also accumulated a tremendous amount of equity gain if they were to sell at today's prices. What happens when a housing market crashes, or when a housing market begins to correct? The smart people who are the investors, they are able to liquidate that asset. All of those, if a large percentage of those houses come to market over a 12-month window, generally speaking, it takes about 12 months to liquidate a single residential rental property, because you can't kick the tenant out. You've got to wait till your lease renewal comes up, and that's when you are able to sell it. Give those 12 months to 24 months, and all of a sudden that inventory comes in the market because those people don't want to lose money anymore. They have realized the equity gain that they have in that real estate over the last 10 years. And now they see that the house prices are not even keeping up with inflation. So they want to sell. So all of a sudden, those houses come onto the market. Those people are also able to take a few $1,000s less because they've made equity gains in those properties over 10 years, and they've had someone in that house renting it paying off their mortgage for 10 years. So they're willing to take, even a $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 drop in price just to get rid of the property. The ordinary homeowner, the ordinary British Columbian cannot do that. $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 to them, that dictates whether or not they can buy their next house. That's also all after-tax dollars for them. So losing $10,000 in price means they have to earn $20,000 to make that $10,000 back. This is why throughout the 1990s, when Canada's house price correction was ongoing, it was ongoing from 1990 till 1998, we didn't see a real drop at all in the average selling price of houses across Canada. What you saw was basically 8 years of stagnation. Prices stayed right where they were. Why was there price stagnation? Because the only people who would move were the people who could afford to move. Obviously, if you're going to lose money in your house, most people who are mortgaged to the hilt can't afford to move. So what they do instead is stay in their house, and they wait for enough equity to be built up so they can make a decision. If you look at Canada between January the 1st, 2015, till May the 31st, 2015, only the provinces of British Columbia and Ontario have homeowners not lost money. Every other province other than British Columbia and Ontario, price change has been below inflation. When prices do not increase with inflation, homeowners lose money. Now people say, well, Ross, that doesn't make sense. My parents owned a house all through the 90s, and at the end of the 90s, they had equity built up in their house. And I smile and I say, yes, they do. But the equity they built up was through paying down their mortgage. Equity is built in two ways in residential real estate: the pay down of mortgage debt and changes in average selling price, or changes in the market value assessment of a property. There's much confusion, it appears, that equity gain is only tied to the average selling price. Well, if that was the case, real estate would be the worst investment you could ever make. You've got to remember, if you bought a house for $100,000 25 years ago, and it did not go up a single penny in 25 years, but you paid off your mortgage in 25 years, you now have $100,000 of equity. Even though a house is still worth the same $100,000, you no longer have any debt on that property. So you have built up $100,000 in equity by paying off your mortgage. This is the calculation that CMHC actually and Genworth, the two mortgage insurance companies, use. See, we've read in the press about fears of CMHC and the Canadian taxpayer having to pay the bill for all these mortgages that have been loaned over the last 15 years if the housing bubble pops, or when the housing bubble pops. Well, I can assure your listeners, CMHC and Genworth, the Government of Canada and Canadian taxpayers, have zero concern, about the housing bubble popping, because in most cases, the house prices have already increased to a point, and the mortgage payments have already been made long enough that virtually, unless you purchased a house after 2012, CMHC and the government has no risk. The risk on a housing bubble is the risk to the homeowner. The risk to the housing bubble is not the banks, it's not the real estate agents, it's not the government, it's the homeowner, because they take all of the hidden equity comes off the top, and that's their equity that is taken away. So when we're talking about foreign investors in real estate, you heard that the Cameron Muir from the Vancouver Real Estate Board come out and say that he did a survey and he couldn't find any truth to it. Right, he couldn't find any truth to it because there is no truth. But what he failed to do was he failed to ask all the members of the Vancouver Real Estate Board to simply forward their FINTRAC forms for any foreign purchases that took place over the last 5 years to the board, and they were going to add them up. They could have whited out the purchasers' names. All they had to leave was the place for the people came from, their residency. So Cameron Muir, instead of giving the public a hard number, he went ahead and tried to debunk it, but still left the myth available. In other words, our research shows that it has very little impact. What they should have said was, here's the paperwork. This is the proof. We track every single foreign buyer that's bought a house in British Columbia in the last 10 years because our members would go to jail if we didn't track it. The Canadian government would put them in jail if they didn't track it. So we know this number is 100% accurate. So all of the people in British Columbia, don't listen to it's just a myth. Don't listen to it. But of course, the Vancouver Real Estate Board, that doesn't work out to their best interest. The Vancouver Real Estate Board wants housing prices to keep going up so they can keep selling houses. Anybody who questions this, go to Calgary, that's CREB.com, pull up the January report from the Calgary Real Estate Board where they told everybody in Calgary everything was going to be rosy this year. They were still going to post 25,000 sales this year. CMHC believed them. The Government of Canada believed them. The Government of Alberta believed them. Guess what? They're on track to only do 17,000 sales this year. Now, imagine someone coming into you and saying, we're going to take away 7,000 out of your 25,000 sales that you earned money on this year. It's a simple calculation. You're talking about a decrease in income of 30%. Of course, the Vancouver Real Estate Board is not going to go out there and tell people, hey, foreign buyers aren't a myth. Housing prices are going up because housing bubbles inflate. This is why they inflate. If you're making plans, if you're worried about losing money in your house, don't sell it. Don't buy a new one because their members would be hurt.
So what kind of shape are we in nationally? And, comparing the local markets, each market's unique, right?
No, this is another myth.
Okay.
Yes, each market is unique in the sense of maybe the municipality is not going to let your city get larger. So I live in the city of Burlington in Ontario. That's my hometown. This is the place my family sold real estate in for 40 years. We are the only city in the GTA that cannot grow. We have reached the boundaries of our city. There's a green space that's north of us that will never change. That is not, there won't be a legislation change to change that because there's a natural feature there called the Niagara Escarpment that we butt up against. One end of our city is bordered by the Royal Botanical Gardens. The other city is bordered by Bronte Creek Provincial Park. And then we've got Lake Ontario to the south and the escarpment to the north. So the city of Burlington cannot grow by adding subdivisions any longer. The only thing they can do is have infill. So that is a local consequence of this real estate market. But that's only relevant to the people who want to live in Burlington. I live in the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. And what I know is that in the Greater Toronto Area, people will move from Toronto to Mississauga to Oakville to Burlington to Hamilton. They will move to the small suburbs. They'll go to Oshawa. That's what's called the GTA. So people move based on what they can afford. So in terms of this local market talk that everybody hears about, local market talk only goes back to affordability. This includes Alberta and the oil patch slowing down. Everybody says that is those are local markets. No, it's not. It's a provincial market. The province's entire sales of residential homes has changed. People who would pay a crazy price up in Moose Jaw, or Moose Factory, wherever the heck it is, they only move up there because the housing prices originally were cheaper, but as soon as the housing price difference matters, they move back down to Edmonton. Edmonton people move back down to Calgary. This is instead of staying in Edmonton, they move back to Calgary because Calgary housing prices have dropped. There is no such thing as a local market unless you live on an island. All markets are impacted by a little bit larger, let's call it a drivability factor. So as long as you can drive, if I have to drive an extra half an hour to go to work, but I can have a great big 2-story, 4-bedroom, a house that's 600 square foot bigger than what I can live in driving 30 minutes less, a lot of people make the choice to drive that 30 minutes to get that bigger home. This is why the myth of local market is a myth that is created by the realtors, by the real estate system. And if you look at the real estate system, the entire definition of a realtor is you need to talk to a local professional. Well, I encourage anyone to call a local professional and ask them what the average selling price is in their community right now, because I know those local professionals will not be able to give you the answer. I posted a message on the major forum for all realtors in Canada last week, and I asked them, can someone please tell me what the average selling price is in the GTA on May 31st? There are 60,000 realtors working that market, Jim. 60,000 realtors. This is the only publication that's available for realtors. So these guys basically have the market tied up. Not one single realtor could tell me what the average selling price was on May the 31st. So real estate markets are not local. It's simply just another myth. Now, when we look at the market, you have to look at it provincially. So because Canada we're so tight along the border because of our climate, or we got to go up through a center sphere in the province, we don't have a lot of large cities. So when people talk about housing prices in Vancouver, the only people who would talk that way would be the realtors in Vancouver who want to keep this myth of housing prices not correcting, or this is going to go on forever. They want to keep it going on. If you can buy a house that is 25% bigger on a 50% bigger lot by taking transit or by moving out away to one of the Vancouver suburbs, that's what you're going to do. But those Vancouver suburb numbers never show up in the Vancouver number. And for Vancouver people out there, they have it even worse, because Vancouver is actually covered by two real estate boards, the Greater Vancouver Real Estate Board and the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. And those two boards do not put their numbers together to give you the number for Vancouver CMA. So this is why real estate is not local, it is regional. But your realtor is never going to want you to believe that. Nobody's going to want you to believe that. It's a fact when you look at how the housing bubbles are calculated.
Ross, with the bubble at nearly 40%, does that mean tomorrow or next year my house is going to be worth 40% less?
No. Now, if we look at history in Canada, Jim, what it means is you just won't move. Like throughout the 90s, everybody said about housing prices were dropping. No. The average selling price throughout the 90s stayed around $145,000 across Canada from 1990 to 1998. It didn't change. The reason was, you're not stupid. You're not going to move. You're going to stay in your house. You're just simply, you're going to pay down your mortgage, as you always would. And then sometime in the future, if you feel that you have enough equity built in your house and conditions in the mortgage rate environment or the price of houses have changed, then you may move. Now, where the fly in the ointment with this discussion really is new home builders. Because if you look at how there is only one housing market in Canada, so you can't listen to the realtors and you can't listen to the builders. That's what CMHC does. CMHC listens to the builders and they listen to the realtors. They don't listen to it as one homogeneous unit. The best way to explain it is this. If I can afford to buy a house for $500,000 and I go out to look for a home, I don't care if I buy a new home for $500,000 or I buy a resale home for $500,000. I'm going to buy the home that best suits me, and probably what that means to me is where I get the most for my money. I don't care if it's a resale. I don't care if it's a new home. Now, the realtor cares, because the realtor doesn't make any money if you buy a new home. You buy it directly from the builder. The realtor gets no income. He wants you to buy the resale. Where builders have been confused over time is what happens with that buyer. Well, if that buyer chooses to buy a resale at $500, the builder has lost out. The realtor has got a windfall, because that realtor is going to have 2 or 3 more sales in the sales chain that also take place. The economy, so the local economy, the regional economy, the provincial economy, and the national economy actually benefit more from a resale home taking place because that'll set off a series of other sales that also take place. When someone chooses a new home, there are no other sales that take place in the resale market. It's a single purchase. But what builders can do that you can as a homeowner, Jim, is builders are already making a substantial profit in the prices that they're able to charge. Obviously, If the sale prices went up 6% last year, their costs did not go up for 6%. Their profits did. But builders are business people. So when a housing market corrects, like it did in the 1990s, the builders lower their prices. People stop choosing resale homes and they buy a new home instead. And that's what happens to the market. So when you're saying, do you personally have to worry? You probably don't have to worry, because you're probably just going to stay at the same place that you're in without moving. That's what your choice would be. Where the problem is arising is the demographics of the Canadian population, as the baby boomers now are getting to a point of being able to retire, being ready to retire. Those people are relying on their personal residence as a way of funding their retirement. So there's where the problem is. If the people that own 2,000 square foot houses can't sell their house at a profit, they can't move to the 3,000 square foot house. The 3,000 square foot house has a baby boomer in it who's retiring, and they need to get the equity of their house to be able to fund their retirement. They're going to have to lower their price to make that happen. That's what's different about this time versus the 1990s. There was no demographics switch happening in the 1990s that there is happening right now. Interest rates are already at historical lows. So in the 1990s, people could get through it by interest rates falling. That's why we didn't see house prices fall. They just stagnated. What we've seen since 2003 is steadily decreasing interest rates on the money that you borrowed for a mortgage against steadily increasing house prices. So we have never seen that before, Jim. That's where my main concern is right now, in terms of even when I talk about these items, because, calculating how housing bubbles form, I think when the public becomes aware that these calculations are 100% accurate, using the numbers that are already out there in the public, I'm not fabricating numbers. I'm using the numbers that are already out there. It could set off panic selling, and it could set off panic selling when you consider the amount of equity that is right now Canadians have in their homes, because it's staggering, Jim. Throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, this equity did not exist that exists today, and now it's existing for people who are ready for retirement. So that is beyond my expertise. I am an expert in housing markets. That's all I'm an expert in. I am not an expert in economies. I am not an economist. I have no more insight into that than the average Canadian has. I can only suppose what happens if, for all of those people who are thinking about retiring in the next 5 to 10 years and they need to get money out of their houses, what's going to happen if they can't get that money out they were counting on? What consequences is that going to have to the economy? And I think that's where the government's the senior economists at the government, I think that's where the people who are normally helping us should be focused. Look at, we got through 2007 when the Americans crashed. We dropped our rates. We encouraged Canadians to go out and buy. It got a little out of hand. It's gotten a little crazy. How can we help them recover? Because it's not going to recover with lower interest rates. No matter, universally, every economist we speak to, and everyone you hear on the news or in the newspaper, they say interest rates are going to increase. Even if they only increase 1 or 2%, they're going to increase. As interest rates increase, equity decreases. You're not building equity as quickly as you were with that lower interest rate mortgage. When those mortgages come up for renewal, during the first 5 years of ownership, so all the first-time buyers out there who have bought, you pay down very little equity via your mortgage. The only gain that you make is hopefully the average selling price is going to increase. The problem that you have is that the combination of selling price and interest rate right now is already at a max. So the average selling price that first-time buyers are able to pay, they're able to afford. In other words, again, go right back to our first discussion. What houses sell? Well, the people that can afford to move. The people who can afford to buy a first-time house today, they're at the maximum. Interest rates go up, the amount they're able to spend on a house decreases. Their mortgage comes up for renewal in 5 years. Average selling prices have an increase. They're not able to move to a larger home because they don't have enough equity. This is the situation that we're in right now, and that's why what is the consequence of this bubble popping? I have no idea. All I know is that sooner or later, all housing bubbles have to pop because housing prices can't keep going higher. The old story that prices can only increase as much as interest rates decrease, 100% true. And every single calculation involved in real estate markets is a mathematical 100% certainty. There is no flexibility. There is nothing to do with the snowstorm in January making sales not happen that month. That is all BS. Real estate is a 100% mathematical calculation sooner or later.
Ross, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Thanks, Jim.
And we'll chat with you in a month.
Okay.
My guest has been Ross Kay from Ross Kay Realty Consultants, his website, rosskay.com. You're listening to HoweStreet.com Radio. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HoweStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HoweStreet.com Radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HoweStreet.com Radio is a production of HoweStreet Media Incorporated.